Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. Quick reminder, we are available next day audio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all of the usual places that you find your audio replays. I'm using Pocket Casts at the moment. I moved because Spotify was getting junked up with all kinds of stuff. So that's one I recommend, but use whatever you feel and catch us the next day for your audio commute or whatever else you use podcasts for. So welcome back. Walter with us this time. You're advocating public transport above you, Walter, but you were stuck in airport hell last time. So thank you for getting back to North Carolina and joining us on the stream here. And today we are getting back to level 2 AC charging, so I'm happy with that. Crucial piece of the puzzle and something I want to get into a bit more often if we can. So we'll look forward to talking to David from Smappee very soon here. But just briefly, as we start off in the news, I was kind of taken with the NEVI headlines last week. It's been out of the picture a little bit recently just because of the funding pause that happened back in February with the Federal Highways Administration pausing all programs with NEVI funding and waiting for revised guidance from that agency. Last week, the news came out that 16 states and the District of Columbia would be suing the Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation, to get that money back for unlawfully withholding funds. Now, this is more of a hot take kind of thing because we kind of knew it was headed to the courts, and we're just really a step closer to that kind of legal action now. But it was led by your state, Eric, California, and without going too far into the politics of it, California hasn't done a whole lot in terms of getting stations in the ground for NEVI-funded stations, at least. But what are you thinking, kind of right off the bat, of where the legal action's heading and California's role in the kind of outcome potentially?
Well, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. The sort of you snooze, you lose, right? With California, I think they victims of our own sort of delays. And then I hate to say this, but I feel like some of this is political posturing, like more than anything else. Because I mean, it is California has sort of, at least the politicians and the administration here have sort of put their foot down and said we're opposed to Trump and the Trump administration, and we're going to do all of the signals. It's political signaling, right? That we can to make it clear that we oppose this administration without necessarily putting any sort of skin in the game. Because this is pretty obvious. There was no legal precedent or standing for the Trump administration to pull that funding. I think they said, they listed it as like arbitrary and capricious, and it kind of was. So, yeah, I mean, it's just more delays than anything else, right? Because even if they successfully sue, how long is it going to take to sort this in a court and get it done? And I also have my criticisms from California just in the substance of it anyway, because I'm going to be the last person who's going to complain about more chargers going in. I recently did a video on my channel, and I think I even got some comments from some viewers, like basically saying it was like maybe even unnecessarily negative, because I just went through and visited a bunch of chargers in Northern California, and they're delayed, they're not built out, a lot of them are broken, a lot of them are slower even if they're in the ground. So there's a lot of need still for these NEVI chargers, but then when I look at where they were going, it's more piling onto existing infrastructure. So it's supplementing rather than what CARB kind of read the Riot Act to Electrify America, saying, hey, look, your job was to put chargers where they weren't commercially viable, and you ended up putting them only where they were commercially viable, leaving massive gaps in the state of California. And you would think that NEVI is another one of those funding channels that's going to fill in those underserved gaps. And unfortunately, it doesn't even look like the NEVI sites that they planned out are going to really do that. They're just going to supplement. So, I mean, I'm kind of like ambivalent with NEVI. Like I said, I'm never going to turn down more public charging, especially when it's actually faster and has reliability metrics tied to it. But at the same time, you know, even without the Trump administration withholding the funds and the lawsuit, by the time these NEVI stations get built in, I'm expecting to see Mercedes-Benz high-power charging. I'm expecting to see Iona high-power charging. I'm expecting to see more Pilot Flying J and some of these other stations that are just frankly more compelling than what we were expecting from NEVI anyway. So it's kind of like, okay, you know, go through the motions, get the lawsuit in and establish that they can't just pull the rug out from the funding and then move on. But yeah, anyway, I'm done.
Well, it's a neat handoff to Walter, because a lot of those pieces that you mentioned, the private investment is happening, or at least emanated from his area initially. Walter, do you see a role for NEVI eventually kind of pulling through this, or are you just kind of focused on the private side now?
Well, two things. First off, the answer is yes, I see a role for NEVI, and it was 4 years ago. Right now, it seems like their time in the sun has kind of come and gone, and their purpose is to excite the market in order to get private funding to accelerate. Well, private funding has accelerated. We are accelerating. The private funding is large checkbooks are writing big checks, and stations are going in. I was just reviewing one station by BP Pulse in Richmond Hills that the check-ins were all stellar. Everyone was saying this is the way it should be: big station, 12 stalls, Alpitronic hyperchargers with a attached facility right off the interstate, beautiful charging. This way it should be, sort of thing. So definitely the private funding has arrived, and you could argue that the original purpose for NEVI, in order to create a catalyst to attract a market stampede, has kind of come and gone. The stampede is here. Secondly, I personally think that the Trump administration was purposefully provoking a lawsuit, because what that does is it plays in their hand, and now they could just delay further, because once it gets hung up in court, things start grinding to a halt, and then they don't have to do anything. As soon as it gets a lawsuit, well, we can't do anything. Sorry, this is going to the courts. We're going to have to wait to see how. So they just successfully punted into the future by California taking the bait, in my opinion. So, and there was nothing California could do. I mean, the answer from the administration was silence. And the silence was an answer that we're not going to be moving forward, if at all possible. So they needed to be provoked with a lawsuit, and there was really no way around it. But again, I agree with Eric. This was all political positioning for future political conversations that are occurring. And it's unfortunate to see it get dragged through, because as everyone is agreeing, there's definitely dark corners of the map that could be filled in successfully with NEVI.
We are starting to see, and I mean, probably as a bookend to this, but the kind of catalyst that we talked about, Quick Trip in Wisconsin is largely, I think most of its sites at the moment have been NEVI funded, albeit a small portion. You've seen Minnesota, the neighboring state, start to put in a few bits of federal state level funding to kind of fill in some of the gaps that potentially start to appear. California has a $55 million program that's purely, shovel-ready sites that should start showing up for you, Eric, in the next probably year or so. So the states are starting to fill in some of those gaps in funding, but it's if it's playing the long game, I know who's still going to be here at the end of it, and it isn't the people being sued. It's the states that are going to be rolling this stuff out.
Well, and I mean, I definitely agree that it's political theater, but the one thing I might push back on, Walter, is when you said there's not really much else California can do. I kind of disagree on that, in the sense that I feel like what they could have done is just funded it and then used the lawsuit to get recompense, basically, from the federal government. So if this weren't political theater and they were actually serious about it, they would just fund the chargers and then bill the federal government, right? Make that as part of their lawsuit. So if that's kind of why maybe I'm not I'm not the greatest advocate for the California administration at this point, but to me it's mostly virtue signaling and political theater rather than actual interest in helping consumers.
And as far as people who are, getting it done, New York, Pennsylvania, my friends in the Northeast here, just keep on rolling out stations. Both of them continuing to roll out the network. New York just completed the southern tier here in the last couple of days with a new station activation. So it's still going. There's 80 stations now. It's on its way to 100. Whereas last check-in was about 50. So I'll have an update on that soon. I just wanted to get you guys' opinions really, but we will move into our main topic here now that we're starting to... Oh, actually, I think David may have some thoughts on NEVI. So we'll bring you up, David, and we can either jump into our main topic, or if he wants to give us some thoughts, we're happy to do that. So let me introduce you all to David Streitfeld of Smappee. Thanks so much for joining us, David. Appreciate you coming on to mostly AC charging, but if you have some thoughts on NEVI, we're more than happy to entertain them.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you so much for having me on. And again, really grateful to be able to be here. But no, I happy to give my 2 cents, because actually I'm really glad that we're starting here, because really, this whole cancellation of funding subsidies, it really crystallizes the moment that we're in right now. With the federal government pulling back on NEVI funding, it makes it really clear that we can't rely on top-down investments. And I think, a lot of how the industry has been is really rebate driven. And, what matters, most now is really about total cost of ownership and, what it takes to get a charger, not just install it, but to maintain it, avoid grid penalties, like what's that ongoing cost, with demand costs, and be able to adapt, as utility rates keep shifting. And really at Smappee, we've always believed in making, EV charging part of a broader energy management system, so, that sites can scale smartly, whether or not incentives are there. And, that's really part of how we benefited being over in Europe is, how do you do things, the most simple and low cost way? So if you're a developer, fleet manager, property owner, your question isn't, where can I get free money? It's, how can I make EV charging pencil out, without it? That's the future. And, that's where, we focus at Smappee.
I that's a really good segue, actually. Thank you for piecing that together. But we met at EV Charging Summit and Expo in Las Vegas. And, the big theme of the show there was, I think, a lot of people going in a little bit tentatively, worried about how, because it was really one of the first shows of the season, and after a lot of this news had dropped in February, and I think some people went in a little bit tentative, and then coming out of that and coming out of things like ACT Expo on the fleet side, there's a lot more energy, and mainly because of the reasons that you kind of highlighted there. Everyone starts to kind of look through the lens more of, okay, profitability, efficiency, cost savings, all of the kind of things that we're going to get onto with the home charging and energy management side. But maybe you can take us back a step and kind of, you mentioned Europe there really briefly, but maybe you can tell us about your history. I know you've got kind of a long and storied history in the energy sector. Maybe you can give us a little bit of context so we can start the conversation around that. Yeah,
no, absolutely. So I'm actually based in Los Angeles, in California, currently in Houston, Texas, actually attending a solar, trade show that's out here. But I've been, in and around clean energy for over 15 years, solar, HVAC, smart home, energy finance, energy management. Now I'm leading Smappee's growth, across North America. And this for me isn't new. Like in the solar industry, that the term that they coin is they call it the solar coaster. Like it constantly having to adapt to change, and we're seeing a lot of that same thing, happening for the EV, charging infrastructure, and with Smappee's path again is a little similar to my own, being going first from energy management, to then into EV charging, because Smappee is not your typical EV charging company. You know, most of these charging manufacturers make a charger, and you know, most of those chargers do the same thing, and you know, have you know, a shared set of features and functionality. And what Smappee is we're an energy management company first. So Smappee is actually based over in Belgium. We're founded almost 20 years ago, and you know, we positioned ourselves as becoming a global expert, you know, in energy intelligence, and that started from, you know, first metering, you know, both residential and commercial, and you know, having a product that was sold in over 120 countries around the world, and to also like building our own clean tech like living lab. So where Smappee's based, we actually built our headquarters where, you know, we have solar, we have battery, we have chargers that are for employees and for the public, and even this ice buffer that's under the parking lot that actually heats and cools the building, and everything's controlled by our energy management system. So it's something that we really lived and breathed ourselves. And ultimately, kind of what the mission was, you know, with our founder and with our company, was being able to, you know, create technology that was easily scalable, that was, you know, cost effective, and ultimately, you know, was able to be picked up by whomever in terms of like its intuitiveness. So we've evolved from, you know, energy management to then getting into EV charging about 6 years ago, both with AC and DC. From there, we've gotten into battery storage and controlling batteries. We're doing whole charging squares over in Europe called smart stops, where, you know, it's a bunch of level 3 chargers that are being installed, and they're oversubscribed to the transformer. So kind of going back to NEVI, like bringing technology like ours in, you know, that again, we happen to have had developed before, you know, before the charging industry really took off, is what's helping to mitigate, you know, a lot of these challenges that the industry faces. So like going back to like, you know, us meeting at EVCS and even at ACT, 100%. So one of the main reasons why, you know, people came to our booth and were talking to us, we're looking for solutions around both the amount of time that it's taking to get projects in, because if there's a transformer upgrade, if there's you know, electricity that has to be panels have to be changed out, you're looking at 8 months, upwards of 18 months, plus, you know, all the costs, all the extra costs that have to go into the project, and looking for alternatives in the market that again enabled that to be lessened or mitigated at all. And now what Smappee is also doing in Europe is VPP. In Europe, how they're also a little bit further ahead in terms of years, is even the utility rate structures are a little bit more complicated. They have dynamic rates over there, where even homeowners, every hour of the day, the cost of power changes. Every day is different. It becomes something where you no longer can manage those things yourself. And even where I'm at right now in Texas, you know, there's constantly headlines in the news. Like right now, one I saw today about how the summer that they expect blackouts, just not enough, you know, power in the grid. And that's really where, you know, smart energy management, you know, comes into play to be able to help, you know, balance the grid and you know, minimize, you know, a lot of the issues that you know, that are now happening.
It's kind of music to my ears, and I'm hoping we're at least somewhere in the towpath of Europe. At least I know we're a much less mature market here in the US and Canada, but that energy management piece has always been fascinating to me. It's something that's always seemed to be promised, or, you know, just over the hilltop. And I see some manufacturers getting closer than others, but it's good to have someone who's kind of, you know, seen it from the energy management side. And, you know, you've developed in the US market, but you're also seeing a European company here who's, you know, baked it into their core of their existence and now shifted into EV charging. But I want to give Walter a chance here, because we touched on a lot of these shows, and Walter was walking the floor at ACT Expo and had a lot of kind of conversations with folks in the charging space. Walter, how much of this kind of energy management piece and the storage piece that David's touched upon there, how much of that came into the kind of conversations you had? And then if you want any follow-up questions from kind of the intro that David gave there, please feel free to jump on.
Certainly. Yeah. The vibe I got was burgeoning markets, and the nuance that's being described here was really not even on the radar of most of the people who were attending the convention. At least that was the impression that I got. The energy management piece, unless they're one of the organizations that are actually running the depots and looking at ways of sharpening their pencil to finer decimal points, the people who were otherwise just trying to kickstart their electrification journey aren't really in tune with the, we might call it EV electrification 320 instead of EV electrification 101, which is really what we are down here in the United States. So there were a couple of software vendors, but there didn't seem to be a lot of activity at the booths that I was crossing paths with. And I don't think it's because they didn't have compelling products. I just don't think people are aware that the story that we're currently in the progress of writing has already been written, and in Europe, there are several chapters ahead of us. So the solutions that are there seem amorphic and hard to understand until it becomes real for us. And I don't know, David, if that's a fair assessment of how you see the American market currently or not.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that those are the conversations that I'm having every day. Just how we're following in that same path, and that's also what's benefited Smappee is a lot of those things that we had to solve for are things that we're just now starting to to recognize here in the U.S. Like, again, capacity constraints were a problem with Europe years and years ago, again, mostly because of EV adoption really starting to strain the grid, and the need for, again, being able to use that existing infrastructure, because believe it or not, in most places, in most commercial buildings, even in residences, there is sufficient capacity for chargers to go in. The problem is the way that codes are, like historical codes. When things can't talk to each other and have visibility to each other, then you have to be extra safe and have buffers in place so that your panels don't go over capacity, breakers don't trip. But when you have something that's intelligent and can react real time, instantaneously, and be able to throttle itself up and down, what you really do is you unlock the capacity that's actually there in that building, which, believe it or not, it can be upwards of like 70% of a building's energy capacity just sits there unused. That's what you're really unlocking with smart energy management, so that, again, instead of having to always having to overbuild, instead being able to just use what already exists without sacrifice, being able to still get the rate of charge needed and give a good experience to the driver, the fleet, whoever it is that's going to be charging, but not have to do kind of that status quo of what normally had been expected, which is that you're always having to to build more. And where Smappee's experience comes from is like we have over 100,000 chargers deployed internationally, most of that being in Europe. And most recently, we have a partnership with Windrose, who's the Tesla semi-truck competitor, to develop megawatt charging for them, as well as V2G. And what that's all about is it's more about energy management, more so about again the charger itself. And that's what little by little the folks within the industry in the US are recognizing is, again, it's less about the charger and it's more about the energy management that really drives value and helps but to bring down that whole total cost of ownership, which makes things pencil. And then if there's a rebate or subsidy available, that becomes cherry on top, instead of there being this reliance where if that's not available or not there, then it sometimes can be near impossible to make some of these projects be able to work.
I think that, I mean, it touches on a good point because, you know, you can see the David's kind of one of the chargers behind me. It looks really nice. You know, we focus a lot on the looks of these, you know, things, the level of power. We start to touch a little bit into the smart features side, but I think it's still very surface level, right? Usually that means, does it have an app? Is it going to be Wi-Fi connected? Can I set my charge limit? That kind of thing. It feels very basic compared to some of the features that you're starting to get into there, David. Maybe you can give us as we move into kind of the AC charging side and where we are or where we've come from in the States to kind of where we hopefully are going with the energy management side. Where are we on that timeline compared to maybe where Europe is, and then where do you see Smappee products and the suite fitting into that kind of evolution of AC charging?
Yeah, well, first, in terms of you know, putting things into context. So today, Smappy's only doing AC charging in the US. We just launched our first AC charger, brought it over last year with plans of eventually doing DC charging over here too. But the current state is, you know, 80-90% of charging, you know, happens at home, at work, at destination. And that also has become a bigger topic of conversation. So like when I went to EVCS last year, I don't know if you guys were also there, but there was a lot more talk about DC a year ago. And there's a lot of talk about NEVI, about again, putting in as much DC as possible. What was interesting is that there's a shift, you know, from 2024 to 2025, and AC became, you know, much more the topic of conversation, and realizing that multifamily dwellings were probably one of the biggest challenge areas, and ultimately, again, bringing charging to where people reside or where they go every single day, because that covers, you know, most of everyone, minus the road trips that people might take, you know, on occasion. And what we've seen is that, you know, for homes, about 40% of homes don't have enough capacity for just one charger. At businesses, that could be 60 to 80%, you know, don't have extra capacity, you know, sitting around for chargers to be able to go in. And that's, you know, as these installers, these developers and integrators have started to do more and more projects and seen that frequency, and that there's really no avoiding it with just traditional solutions. That's what's become the you know, the pain point in the industry. And those capacity limits are, you know, are real. And I think it's like anything else. It takes time and experience to start to recognize that. The other piece is now that there's been chargers that have been out there for quite some time in the US, and now they're starting to be, you know, rip and replace, you know, folks going back and changing chargers out. There's more of an understanding around, you know, charger reliability, charger uptime, you know, how important the quality of a charger is, the repairability, you know, what does the maintenance look like? Obviously, it, you know, it all impacts the ROI, but that too is also something that Smappee became very, very keen to. So kind of going back to, you know, the image behind your head, Steve. What also is very unique about Smappee is that, you know, we make, you know, really high quality hardware. So both are AC and DC chargers, but the AC one that's behind you that can either be on a wall or in a pedestal, it's all metal housed. So it's steel and aluminum. Even the plug, most, you know, charging plugs, the J1772 has a plastic clip, and that's usually the very first thing to break. And if that breaks, a lot of times, again, the charger won't work. You can't initiate a charge session. So with Smappee, we use a metal clip. All of the components inside the charger are modular and replaceable. So if there's a failure, it's a piece that gets replaced or gets upgraded. And there's a lot of remote diagnostics that our chargers also provide. Aside from metering, we have, you know, humidity, temperature, a lot that can be seen and you know, remotely diagnosed and reset from afar to also prevent the truck rolls. And what was also interesting, actually, at EVCS where we met, is one of the networks that we're partnered with over in Europe, Monta, who's a big network provider. They we ended up getting a lot of referrals coming from them. And it was organic, because what would happen is Monta has a ranking of all the different hardware that are integrated with them, which is almost like 800 chargers. And Smappee was in the number 5 spot for AC charging. And the ranking was based on reliability, on uptime, on successful charging sessions and feedback. And that's also become Smappee's strong suit over time. So as people now are becoming, more focused on, wanting something that's going to last, wanting something that's going to be reliable. And, to another point you made, Steve, something that just looks nice, that, doesn't scream dispenser, but, if it's going to be installed at a, nice looking hotel or office space, that it looks nice, on the wall or on the pedestal, as opposed to, again, to something that looks, a bit more generic.
Yeah, I drove through some of the more affluent neighborhoods of Greater Boston sometimes, and I can see this fitting right inside some of the new builds that are in Lexington and some of those pleasant neighborhoods. So definitely it looks the part for sure. Eric, you have lived both sides of the home charging equation. You were down in Los Angeles with no AC charging options and making long journeys sometimes, and now more rural and obviously home charging, other than your jaunts out to check on the Northern California DC fast charging scene. Home charging is a big piece of that, including power outages. So you kind of have the experience here of a lot of these pieces. But what jumps out at you from kind of the context that David has painted there for us?
Well, I mean, I think the big thing, David, that I have a question about is just in terms of integration, because we know that Smappee is smart, but does it require smart appliances and smart devices, right? So my question would be, if I have, I have a heat pump at my house, I have an AC unit, I have my charger, I have the washer dryer, right, and the oven. So how many of those devices would need to be smart in order for it to integrate with the Smappee system versus, right, like, am I flipping breakers, right, like the old Okie ingenuity, just lick your thumb and hope for the best and flip the breaker. But yeah, no, I just in terms of how much how many of the appliances and devices really need to be a smart device in order to be integrated with the system versus how much flexibility is there for basically implementing it, either at a commercial or private scale, just to integrate into your system.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and this right here is really Smappee's edge. So the way that our product works is that it can be installed on any existing panel, and it's non-invasive. There's some sensors called current transformers that go around the circuits that need to be measured, that need to be monitored, and that they're monitored in real time as to what's being used in the house, if there's solar, if there's a battery, what those are doing as well, so that the charger is able to be told, what to do the exact moment that it needs to do it. So it actually doesn't matter what appliances you have in your house, what breakers you have in your panel. The reason being is the only thing that Smappee is controlling by default is our charger or chargers, multiple, and that's based on the use of those other loads in the home, like all those house loads. So let's say you're charging your car, your EV's going, and your AC kicks in, you start cooking, your oven turns on, the hot water heater, all of a sudden, capacity goes down and usage spikes. Smappee then throttles back, the rate of charge instantaneously, so that there's not going to be a breaker trip. And then the moment that capacity opens up and again, the loads go down that are being used in the house, then that charging rate gets boosted back up. And it works the same way on the commercial side. And really where Smappee is far ahead is our ability to do more energy management wise than anyone else in the industry. So to give you an example, on a commercial site, what Smappee does is called cascade overload protection. So what's very common in a commercial site is you won't have just one electrical panel where EV chargers are getting installed to, you'll have many. You'll have multiple sub panels. You might have like a main panel that's upstream of that one. And with Smappee, we're able to monitor all those locations simultaneously, so that balancing can happen across the site. So if some chargers are being used but not others, capacity can be sent to where it's needed. But also, we're monitoring overall demand. So in that main panel, we can see how much demand is happening in the building, which means like how much of a surge in energy is happening with like their air conditioning usage on top of the chargers, and to ensure that the chargers aren't going to push that location, over that demand threshold and incur a penalty. And these are the kind of things too that have also become hard for folks to manage, even including Tesla. When they're putting out chargers, how do you manage demand? Because you can't control driver behavior when everyone's plugging in, and these are the things that Smappee does real time, and we're doing it on a per charger basis. So each one of our chargers is controlled independently and prioritized independently based on departure time of a driver, how many miles they need, the user themselves, how much capacity is available. If there's solar, our chargers are able to charge on surplus solar being generated, no matter what the solar system is, because again, we're just monitoring energy in real time and sending that to the chargers, whether it's 1 or it's 50. Like we have one project that was installed fairly recently up in the Bay Area. I think that's where you're based, Eric?
A little north of there, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, close enough.
This company, Pacific American Group, they're in Sausalito, and great case study, because they were only trying to install 3 chargers. They had a 200 amp panel. It's a 2-story office space, and again, would have been over capacity, and their only option was to have to upgrade. And to do that, they have an underground line with PG&E, and it was costing them like over 150 grand of work, both for that line, but also because the transformer had to be upgraded, and they were looking at like almost a 2-year wait, for that transformer to go in. With us, they were able to put the chargers in straight away. They put our energy management system, which is called Infinity, in their panel to monitor everything happening in real time. And they installed 3 of our chargers. That actually your background, Steve, is that photo is actually from that site. And they also have solar there as well. And again, they're all doing it basically with this traffic control, like this orchestration that's happening, with Smappee's energy management system, that's telling these chargers, when to go. And the reality is that, when they've reviewed their data, they've now been installed for over a year. Their chargers are always running at full blast, which is interesting because, again, from a load calculation perspective and from a requirements perspective, they would have had to upgrade. But the reality is that, again, by using our system and our energy management, they're still able to get the speed of charge that they're looking for. But again, avoiding all that cost and all that time, and having something that again was just able to go in straight away. So it's those kind of examples that I'm talking about when we talk like total cost of ownership, because if those things can be cut, subsidies and rebates just become less important. Because if you're doing things at a fraction of the cost, sure, subsidies would be great, but it's no longer mandatory.
I'm interested in how you're communicating the kind of long-term picture. I know we know in EVs in general, we talk about total cost of ownership, long-term, cost savings, that kind of thing. And I don't know that it has translated, especially well in terms of selling electric vehicles themselves. But I wonder in the charging side, if that's something that people have a more long-term view on, whether they're, commercial customers, fleets, or just homeowners who have a long view of their home. In your conversations, do you feel that is an easy sell, or do you have to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of where they're saving, timescales, and that kind of depth of conversation to really sell that long-term cost savings?
it really depends on the client. Like if obviously the easiest is if they're already aware of what those costs are going to be, then it's an easy comparison, and the value is pretty obvious. When it's not, then the stats that we typically use are that we're cutting upfront cost upwards of conservatively we say 30-40%, but again there's instances like this where it was well above that, and then ongoing costs we cut by about 60%, and that's because we're able to look at utility rates, we're able to look at demand and make sure that that's avoided, and that charging's happening at the lowest possible rates. So looking at what someone's current what their costs may look like with upgrades and everything else compared to putting our station in, both with the cost of like our hardware, both the chargers as well as the energy management system, comparatively they it's again 30% is conservative. Again, some people have seen upwards of 60-80%, but again at 30% being conservative.
So Upfront sells itself in a way because you already have that locked in, and then you're looking at more and more savings as you kind of have the unit installed and orchestrating your energy management.
Yeah, and I'd say there's less value recognition for long term. Right now, I'd say the thing that really sells it is the short term, and a lot of that is just lack of understanding in general with how demand penalties work on bills. Like most commercial businesses, that's the least managed line item in the P&L. Just like homeowners, they don't understand how energy is charged, and don't understand that demand can be a sizable part of their bill, like $20-$30 per kilowatt, based on what that peak demand. So it's harder to quantify that. Whereas up front, again, if there's the definite need to have to not enough capacity, which adds up pretty quick. Like let's say they just want to install 5 chargers that if they're fast level 2, they'd all go on to like a 60 amp breaker. So 5 times 60, that's already 300 amps just for 5 chargers. And most house panels, sub panels are 200 amps. So it can add up quite quick. And really what Smappee unlocks is the ability to both, cut the requirement to have to upgrade, but also just deploying, 10 times the amount of chargers. Because when you have a use case where there's going to be long dwell times, people plugged in for hours, for overnight, during a whole workday, they don't need to be receiving, the fastest rate, static rate of charge. What they also can't get is an unpredictable rate, which would be how traditional load balancing is done, where it's first in, first out, and then capacity is just cut as more and more people plug in. With Smappee, it's being able to look at the total amount of capacity available in that building, and as AC is not being used, the elevator is not going, being able to send all that capacity to the chargers so that they're always charging at the fastest available capacity rate, and while also not having to do the upgrades. And if upgrades ever have to be done, it's able to be kind of pushed off to the future, and gives them more like a stepping stone, like a much easier path to be able to to deploy.
And that's a big piece of electrification, right? Especially when you're talking about multiple chargers, multiple vehicles. You don't necessarily have people who are willing to electrify everything all at once. You may want to have that kind of milestone kind of approach, and it sounds like that's something that you're enabling there. Walter, I want to make sure I give you space for questions because I haven't done so yet. So over to you.
Yeah, so in the electrification journey in the United States, one of the things that seems to be in parallel is the renewables on the residential market, both solar and other forms of renewables that are being introduced to residential homeowners for energy independence and decreasing their carbon footprint, all these fun kinds of things. And if you're feeding solar into your home, the most common solution is to not put it into a battery, but instead feed it back to the grid and basically use the grid as your battery, and then just kind of offset the cost. And then as the chargers are feeding an EV, is kind of like a piggy bank system that is getting used for that. But from what I understand, with the Smappee integration, either at a commercial level or residential level, that negates that whole unfortunate dog leg that's occurring to the actual electrons that are flowing. And you could put electrons from a solar panel, portable or fixed, in your backyard directly into your car. Is that not correct?
Yeah, and I could better explain how that works. And I think it all depends on what region of the country that you're in, because in certain places that's of higher value than in others, like Eric out in California, where with net metering laws there, where people that are putting solar on, they're disincentivized from sending anything back to the grid. So self-sufficiency is now important, which is how it's been in Europe for years. So again, kind of following in the footsteps of Europe, and because of that, when you have markets like California, you ultimately want to be able to use as much or all of the solar that's being produced, and not have it shut down or go back to the grid. And that's where EV chargers and EVs become part of the whole ecosystem. And again, this was part of what was recognized earlier in Europe, was again two things: that if you have solar, you want to be able to to have things like a smart charger that Smappee has, to be able to to send power at the right time. But then second is being able to influence your your costs, like being able to influence your expenses, because there's really no other way, just like for a homeowner, for a business owner going solar, where they can influence what their cost of power is in general. But when you're putting EV chargers in, same thing. That solar becomes the easiest way for them to influence what's going to be their cost per kilowatt hour. And having a solution that's able to be solar integrated helps to drive down that cost, and they're able to start producing local power themselves. The way that Smappee solution works is via monitoring. So again, in the panel where the solar is feeding, we're monitoring that solar production in real time. And then what we're doing is we're then telling our chargers when to charge and how fast. So let's pretend like there's 5 kilowatts, 5,000 watts coming off of a homeowner's roof. The home is maybe using 500 watts. So then 4,500 watts would then go to the EV. So the Smappee EV wall charger would match exactly what's left over, send that to the EV, and then throttle in just 1% increments instantaneously to be able to optimize 99% of the solar coming off of the off that system in that moment. And what's unique with Smappee is that we're not just doing that with one charger, but we're able to do that with however many chargers are installed on site, because again, we can balance and have those chargers stay under that solar curve, and keep that site from either importing or exporting power, so that again they're able to be totally self-sufficient. And there's really two reasons why that may be helpful even outside of California. Is to allow for daytime charging. So let's say you have a workplace, you have a homeowner that works from home. Really, there's no thought to daytime charging, especially if they have expensive rates during the day. But when there's the ability to utilize again solar that's on your roof, the sun is up. With Smappee, you can actually tap into that and ensure that only solar is going to go to the EV. If you don't have that awareness and that visibility, in theory, sure, you could still plug in and the sun is shining, but there's no mechanism to ensure that EV is not going to draw from the grid if a cloud passes, if the solar production just starts to drop, or if it's just not enough for the rate at which the EV charges. And that's also what Smappee unlocks is just more flexibility in how charging can happen. And what really defines our intelligence, because I think a lot of chargers in the industry call themselves smart, and typically the definition of smart is, okay, I'm internet connected.
It's got a Wi-Fi chip.
Yeah, you can access on your phone or in a dashboard and be able to look at some stuff and control it. With Smappee, what we call smart or real smart is decisioning. So what we do is we actually forecast out 48 hours ahead of time how much solar is expected to be produced, and that's with weather forecasts. We also are predicting consumption based on historical, and we're also able to do scheduling based on departure time. So rather than the way that most charging solutions do it, which is kind of a start and end time, and then it just charges at a set speed during that time. With Smappee, a user or a commercial site owner is able to set what time does a vehicle need to leave by, and again, how many miles does it need. And Smappee is figuring out, okay, based on the rate schedule with the utility company, based on when surplus solar is expected to be available, what time that person's plugging in, when they have to leave, and how much capacity is available in that house or in that building. It's all being done for them. So all that user has to worry about is when they arrive, plug your vehicle in, and Smappee takes care of when charging needs to occur, because all that driver cares about is when I leave, I just want to make sure that my EV is charged as expected, and they're a happy camper. And just for context,
They also want to know that
go ahead, sorry.
They also want to know that their renewable is being used economically and their power bill is going to be low. So all those things are important factors for them as well. And so at the end of the month, when they get their power bill and it's less, they have you to thank.
Yeah, no, I well said. I forgot to also throw in for context. So I've been driving an EV myself for almost 7 years. I have solar in my house as well. Actually, we have 2 EVs in the house now. So we've totally ditched gas. So lived it and breathed it. Going from back then, not as much infrastructure being available to now, road trips being a little bit easier. But again, having that same circumstance of needing to make sure that, again, I have that vehicle, how important it is that, when I'm leaving, that it's good to go. Otherwise, it really can throw off your day, your plans, anything else. And where I live in Los Angeles, there's no visibility, to my energy use whatsoever. Like we still get paper bills every 2 months. So maybe the most extreme example. So having something that both, gave me visibility, because I'm now seeing, what energy I'm using real time, what my solar is producing in real time, what I'm saving, but also what my EVs are using. Because the other piece that people don't think about is, that energy bill becomes a lot more complicated once EVs go in. It's significantly better than gas, but that bill just becomes, so much more complicated because, like, for my household, our 2 EVs made our electricity bill probably go up like 5 to 6 times. I'm like, not kidding. Like there's so much that that the EV battery takes, and without good monitoring, without energy management, that's the reason why chargers are really the first thing to tackle. Air conditioning comes at a second, but nothing comes close to the amount of power that EVs need, both instantaneously but also like over time. And from a management standpoint, like a cost management, it just becomes more difficult, for that homeowner or for the business owner to be able to tell, okay, what's happening and how do we still manage the things we normally would have managed, being able to tease out, what the EV is, is now using and costing us.
I mean, it's interesting you get into that point, and Tom kind of raised it here with, the location and the net metering rules in California. Maybe setting some of the industry back a little bit, and all of these pieces, home solar, grid support, and resilience, battery storage coming into the mix. It's interesting, David, that you're in Texas, because I'm kind of hearing more and more that Texas is stealing a march on what California could have been, with a little more independence and a little more maybe entrepreneurial spirit in the energy sector. I'd love to hear just kind of any hot takes you have on, you know, where Texas and California are on that roadmap towards this kind of, you know, land of milk and honey of energy management when we have all these pieces in place.
Well, I think what Texas has done, I know it's been very surprising, like how Texas has led the way in really, you know, decentralization and allowing, you know, choice, you know, in you know, with energy providers, as opposed to California that really, I think, has been surprising many with, you know, with the PUC and not really being, you know, being in that leadership position anymore. The thing that's also interesting, I think, in both markets, you know, we're seeing you know, grid strain and you know, brownouts, blackouts, and you know, natural disasters that are happening. So I think there's also that recognition that even aside from sustainability, it's all about resilience and you know, the whole solar and storage and EV combination. Really, what that's becoming, especially, you know, in Texas, is it's more about resiliency and you know, becoming independent, you know, being able to have control, so that, you know, when these instances happen, your lights are still on. You know, you have the ability to, you know, to still go and get out of the house. Like you know, you have a car that'll operate and not be reliant on the gas station that might also not have power, or you may not have a way to be able to get to it. Anyway, there's a lot, but those are things that are coming to mind, especially with some of the people that you know, that I've been talking to out here.
I mean, it's just fascinating because, you know, there's people try to go very binary, and, you know, here's the divide, here's the political divide, and this is the way things will go. You know, Texas is full on, you know, oil and gas and fossil fuels, but I mean, it's very much becoming a model for the rest of the country in some ways. And then we get Texas back to NEVI as well. There's all kinds of things over there, with Texas potentially being able to lead the way with that as well. So it shows you that even though we're in kind of very polarized and divided times, the energy side of it can be a uniting factor, right? I mean, once we get to this place where every one of us could potentially have, you know, if not off grid, but certainly much more control of our you know, energy management and the power side of it, I think that everybody is in favor of energy independence. It just comes down to how you explain it to them and not trying to push something specifically on them.
You're absolutely right. Energy independence or just money. And I think that's what we're also seeing more so this year, at least we did, was just the frequent, you know, there's more and more companies looking to electrify their fleets. And again, for some, it may be about, you know, ESG or sustainability, but for others, it's just pure economics that, you know, they've recognized, oh, if we can get, you know, off of gas cards and lower maintenance costs, it just lowers, you know, the cost per mile. And so again, to your point, Steve, absolutely, there's, I think, both sides of the aisle in terms of benefits. It's, you know, helping us overall when it comes to the environment, but you know, people recognizing just the cultural benefits to, you know, again, waking up every day and, you know, being ready to go, and having some of these cars that actually, you know, drive better because of their center of gravity, and then again, just not having to stop, you know, at third-party stations and having you know, having more of that control yourself, which is something that, you know, resonates with you know, with most, because a lot, you know, before now there was really no way to be able to influence that. So I think that's what solar and that's what you know, storage as well as EVs, you know, have become for some people, as a way to be able to break away from that.
And just to make sure we don't give Texas too much love, Tom does point out that they do have bills in passage through the House that will be very significantly detrimental to solar and wind. There's some setback issues there, ridiculous kind of parallels with having to create as many gas plants as they install for some of the renewable side. So it's not all sweetness and light, but hopefully they see sense and come out the other side of that well. We're coming up on the hour, David. I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time. One thing I would love to make sure we touch on before you head out is kind of your, projecting into the future. You've obviously got the kind of context. You've got a lot of, insights from a mature market with Smappee based in Europe, as you pointed out. Where do you see over the next kind of, the remaining part of the decade or whatever kind of timeline you think it might be? Where do you see us being able to make charging AC specifically smarter in North America over the next, 3 years, 5 years? What kind of timeline are we looking at for this, energy management piece where all the puzzle pieces are kind of starting to be put together?
In terms of, I think, just the overall industry and
yeah, I mean, if we're looking at as consumers, when we, or even commercial customers, how it doesn't feel like it's there yet. It doesn't feel like I can go and maybe I can come to you and you can, put a nice system together for me and I can make it happen in my house. But, when do you think we're going to be there with all the necessary pieces? How do you see the market in the US specifically, I guess, evolving to be something where they just, show up to your doorstep and you can put all the pieces in place that need to be there for someone to have?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, I think I might have seen, one of the comments someone made about V2G, which has been asked about for years. That's probably the first question that people ask before anything else. So things like that, there's a lot of standardization that still is needing to happen, both between the utility companies and with the auto OEMs, and as well as with energy management systems and companies like ours. But what's nice is there is innovation in the market. So as much as I want to say that it's only Smappee, it's not. I mean, we tend to be market leader and do things quite well. But what's really exciting is that there's especially in the both residential and commercial space, there are companies that are coming in and developing solutions that are able to do and solve for quite similar things in terms of of these challenges. So right now, obviously our solutions in the market, there's others that are there too. So it's something that's attainable today. What's not, and what we're still waiting for is V2G, and there's a few solutions in the market, but that really has not been solidified and ironed out and standardized. But when it comes to smart charging, there's companies that have entire smart panels, and they can also link up with chargers that they make. There's companies that do software energy management, where it's all algorithmic and telling the chargers what to do based on data, and there are one or two other companies that also do metering, so that again they're monitoring what's happening in building real time. So it is a real thing that is accessible. It's really from what we've seen, just lack of education and lack of awareness that solutions like this exist, because again of status quo, that if you were to install like an air conditioning system or whatever in a building, there's no other option but to have to upgrade if your panel is full. And this is a paradigm shift, and I think that's the biggest thing that has to happen right now is just a lot of market education to let everyone know that these solutions are out there, because the moment that people find out, it's a no-brainer. But it's more that going out there and people realizing that solutions like this exist. Because like in the residential space, we at times have seen developers putting in standard chargers with like a load controller that will kill power completely to a charger and still accomplish similar things to what Smappee does, but just not in an elegant way and doing things in a much more refined and precise way. So again, there's been people out there attempting to innovate, but I think it's understanding that there's companies like ours that have, really figured out, what does this solution look like, from a customer experience point of view, as well as, simple to install, simple to deploy, and long lasting, that, something that'll go in and last instead of become problematic or having to be, be constantly, fixed or looked after.
Amen to that. We want these things to last for the lifetime of our vehicle, at least, hopefully, and beyond. Hopefully, I think we've done a good job there, of kind of getting the education piece on, at least. Introducing people to what Smappee does and how that can all start to fit together and yield cost savings. We've got the link to smappee.com/US/charging-stations. Anywhere else you'd like to kind of direct people, or kind of parting messages for where they can deep dive into the product suite that you offer?
Yeah, well, they're welcome to go to my LinkedIn page to better understand my background as well. But if they aside from our US product page, if they just go to smappee.com, just our normal website, you can get a good sense for who Smappee is in general, with all the many things that we do. And specifically looking at our testimonials page, which is where we have our published use cases and that really show, what the problems were and what our solution helped to solve. Mostly for commercial projects where, where the problems were much bigger, and really where, we do special things that a lot of others in the industry can't. But I think that those things are also interesting to to review.
Yeah, there's a real rabbit hole to go down. You can definitely start to take a look at some of the products that I only scratched the surface in my reading. So thank you for giving us a little more depth and kind of context around, where you started and how you started to put all this together. I'll leave all the links down below. As David mentioned, LinkedIn will be another one. I'll leave the places you can visit and some of the case studies that he's mentioned. David, thanks so much for joining us, and appreciate your time for giving us a little more smarter home charging.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, David.
Okay, I want to touch on a little bit kind of maybe where you guys see home charging progressing after we kind of, I think that almost paints the picture for, where we can go with it. I'd really love to have, home battery storage, solar on my roof, all this stuff feeding in one elegant orchestration system. But obviously we have some ways to go before that's a reality. What do you all think is the most, if we're looking at AC charging and home charging specifically as a way to kickstart adoption and really start to get over the hump here to realize those advantages of cost savings and all the things that electric vehicles bring, where do you see something like this fitting in most? The priority areas, I guess, is it multifamily dwellings? Are we talking about fleet electrification? And Eric, I think I'm quiet for too long.
Yeah, no, I definitely think for Smappee it would be the multi-unit dwellings, because I think that's the area where you're seeing the most pushback, and I guess also workplace. I know with my now former workplace, they struggled to even fit 8 level 2 chargers in 32 amp level 2 chargers. So and you're talking about a parking lot with 1,200 stalls, so electrifying 8 of them is a pretty measly amount. So and all of it came back to having to put in a separate transformer to run those chargers. So I think these larger parking lots, commercial sites, another big one is like retail sites, right? I know we're seeing an increase of DC fast chargers at malls and things like that. And I'm outside of like the locations near a food court, I would much rather see an implementation of level 2 AC charging And a solution like this is one of those where, hey, we can oversubscribe. So you can say, hey, your mall might have 1,000 parking stalls, and that at any given time, only 5 to 10% of your customers would even potentially be interested in plugging in. But we can run power to all of these different locations, and you don't have to worry about running out, and you don't have to worry about designated EV stalls. So I see a lot of potential for this, just in terms of scale. To your point, in terms of private, I would want to see maybe a different solution from Smappee or someone else, because my concern is, it's great that you don't need smart utility or smart appliances, I should say, but if they're only managing their charger, I think there's a potential there for, call it like another distribution box or whatever. We see these already with EV chargers, where you can do switches between two different chargers, or you can time when power gets, or like the splitter with your washer dryer and an EV charger, and you can just flip back and forth. Having some smart integrated breakers, if you will, or distribution panels, where it's not just the EV charging, you can actually move it from load to load depending on what your desire is, and being able to control that through like an app or a control panel in your home. I think that's a future implementation. And I think, to that point, with a lot of people, I think, are even getting interested in just either going completely off grid, or not even connecting their solar systems to the grid anymore, because there's no reason for it, right? You have these MPPTs, you have the ability to basically charge a massive battery bank that you can power your home from, and it's a huge sink. So having the ability to redirect your solar either to a car or to a battery bank, and then just basically bankroll all of that energy until you actually need to use it at a later date, I think that's where we really want to see, these products, these smart distribution products go.
That's where it excites me, because it feels like such a wasted resource to have sitting in the driveway. I know there's the argument of degradation and cycling, but I think we've proven we're at a good place where degradation isn't really destroying EVs. Modern era, it's a Nissan Leaf from 2012 that's out baking in Arizona garage. That's different. So mostly we all have 70 to 100 kilowatt hours plus sitting in our driveway, and it's a valuable piece of energy storage that could be used much better ends than it currently has. Even my vehicle to load is 1.8 kilowatts. We do some interesting things at the campsite. It's useful in a pinch, but something much more elegant, in this home management system, and being able to, exactly as you say, tell it where to go. In this scenario, I want to do this, and then you start to bring in stuff like AI and some of the smart kind of profiles that these things can build up. That's where I really get excited about all these pieces starting to talk to each other and work in harmony. Walter, what kind of takeaways from that, and where you see it kind of evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, a quick spot check. If you guys are like me, today's the 14th of May, and let's just do a quick round robin. Has anyone charged at a DC fast charger in the month of May so far?
Yes.
You have?
Testing sites.
Okay. Yeah, so I have not. I'm all AC. And I actually went to go pick up my son at college, which is all the way at the Atlantic Ocean. And I live very well interior in what's known as the Piedmont of North Carolina. I filled up my battery. I drove all the way to the coast. I picked him up. There was a AC charger in the main parking deck there. So as I slept on his very dirty dorm room couch, my car was getting clean electrons. And then the next morning... And the next morning, we hopped in the car and drove all the way back home. And so I haven't really. So answer your initial question, AC is where reality lives for EV owners, in my personal opinion. And DC fast charging is kind of a curiosity and a pie in the sky thing that is an occasional occurrence. But we live and breathe on AC. And as the situation evolves, having options in order to creatively solve challenges with opportunities on unlocking unused capacity in a given property is useful in many different scenarios.
Yeah, I was going to say, I were you saying successfully DC charged or attempted?
I was going to say if you connected to a DC charger, but
Yeah,
so you had
but-
one go dead on you?
Oh, I was testing out the problematic ones in my area.
Okay.
So yeah, I hooked up, nothing happened. But I think we've talked about this too, Walter, is that like, I feel like if a majority of, let's just call it long-term parking spaces, assuming it's work or home where you're expecting a car to be sitting for 6 to 8 hours minimum. If a majority of those parking stalls in the country had some sort of EVSE metered power that you could charge your car on level 2 AC, the need for DC fast charging, we might already be close to meeting it, right?
Yeah,
like
very close to zero.
Yeah, it's so much more important that you have level 2 at your locations, hotels, motels. I've maintained those have always been like the most convenient charging stops. They're the ones where you're literally sleeping and you wake up the next morning to a full battery.
Yeah, I mean that's the essence of a good road trip, right? Is having that something that you can basically replicate your home charging situation, at least for the first 200, 300 miles of your road tripping day, even if you're going, I mean, you know, for people who are doing 500, 600 miles, which is pretty common, you know, a road trip day, that sets you off on the right foot, right? No DC charging, cheaper or probably complimentary in a lot of cases. It's just the ideal way to really, you know, take away that DC charge, you know, from that experience.
And I would say also don't discount ease of use, right? And that's both in activation and activation time, as well as just the weight and size of the cable, right? I think if a majority of the charging that's being done were via level 2 AC, I think EV adoption will be further ahead than it is today, just because of how easy and seamless and reliable it is compared to DC fast charging.
Yeah, and the best ownership stories tend to come from people who, you know, after all, are talking about DC and the latest network, or, you know, the biggest road trips, who just say, why would I ever use one of those? You know, I plug in at home, do exactly what Walter says. When I get to a, you know, trip that's 200, 250 miles, I plug in where I'm going because I'm going somewhere. So I stop, I visit, I spend 3 or 4 hours at that place, and that gives you the charge you need to get home. So it's one of the reasons why this year I wanted to cover AC and destination charging so much more, because it's kind of, it's not the shiny thing, right? It's not the big, it's not 30,000 installs over the next 5-6 years. It's not 400 kilowatts. It's not, you know, this piece of hardware that can, you know, look like it's the future gas station, but it's the basis of everything we talk about every 2 weeks here. You know, it's the way we get EV adoption to start moving forward.
But Steve, 1 megawatt charging, 5 minutes to charge your EV. You could do it too.
I think there is, I mean, we've talked about it before a little bit. There's a whole episode, I think, in, you know, whether we do want to replicate the gas station model, because that's what 5-minute charging is essentially, is, you know, going to a dedicated place. And at that point, we stop thinking about, you know, home charging as a real issue. I mean, there's a place for it, and we have to have it, but it just, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and forget one of the core advantages of EVs, which is not even thinking about the fueling experience in 80 or 90% of your use case.
Right. I've always referred to it as a discrete fueling stop, as in that's your only purpose for stopping at that location is to add range to your vehicle. And that's one of those things that EVs has allowed us to step away from, is having a single purpose stop that is only there to add miles on your vehicle. So
all singing from the same hymnal, I think. So that's a way we can unify and end the show there. Thank you to everybody who joined this evening. I think on the next one we will probably be dragged back to DC fast charging because we have Jacob Espinoza from the Artie Penguin 1.
Artie Penguin, all right.
Back is over on X doing all kinds of site reports and calling CPOs to task when they leave their cabinets unlocked.
Darn tootin'.
Yeah,
what's up with that? Let's just leave the keys in the things, right?
Well, how else are we going to see their dirty laundry? Come on.
That's what we want to see what's inside. Maybe we can fix it faster than they can. That's the point. But he does have stuff to talk about this time. Last time we just looked at maps. This time there's actually activations, and New Mexico is starting to.
And Ayana is showing up. Yeah.
Move forward. Yeah, so we got a lot of action over there now. That's a good place to visit the Southwest again. So that will be in 2 weeks' time on the 28th, if my calendar isn't deceiving me. But until then, I go watch my co-hosts' channels here. Let me toss everything up. News Column 3705, holding the aging infrastructure of Northern California to task every week or two. Walter has a video up on EV dads and one of the latest home chargers, I believe, as well as the usual reports on the DC fast charging landscape and anything on out-of-spec bits that we should be looking for, Walter, other than your copious amounts of Expo coverage.
Gravity expansion in Los Angeles.
That's one. That could have been a news item this week, right? Are you? Is that up now?
No, sir. It's in the can.
Okay. I will keep my eyes peeled for it. As far as we're concerned, you can check out the next episodes, what's coming up at plugandplayev.com/coast-to-coast-EVs. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And until then, cheers, nerds.
Woohoo!